Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast. As always, I'm your host Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, I am rejoined by Portland-based author Tom Hatsis, whose latest book, Psychedelic Injustice: How Identity Politics Poisons the Psychedelic Renaissance, is out now. And this is a book in which Tom details, in quite a bit of detail, how these topics of the, quote, culture wars around gender, colonialism, and racial identity have impacted discourse in the psychedelic community, but particularly in terms of online discourse and in terms of what gets presented at conferences and what gets published, what kinds of information gets out there, and the frame in which that information is embedded around these culture war topics. And Tom is rather critical of all this. So we had a conversation about all of these different things, and it's a rather long conversation, and we'll be getting to that in just a moment. But of course, first, let's tackle a few brief announcements. Just to remind you, I'm going to be in Oakland, California on Friday, August 15th. I will be speaking in support of Altar of the Heart Church, which is a Bufo Alvarius-based church in Oakland, California. And I'm going to be speaking about Your Divine Right, 5-MeO-DMT, and non-dual entheogenic experience. This is a ticketed event. We are already about 3/4 of the tickets are sold, but there is still a little bit of room. You can stop by altaroftheheartchurch.com to purchase a ticket if you would like to attend this rather rare event of me speaking publicly, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area, which the last time I did that was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Also, a reminder that the next round of my 5-MeO-DMT Integration Specialist training course with Mindscape Institute is going to be starting up in just a couple months now. It starts on September 17th. It is a 2-hour-long course that meets for 9 weeks on Wednesday afternoons from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time. And using my books, 5-MeO-DMT Integration and Entheogenic Liberation, as the main reading for the course, and it really focuses on my unique approach of helping people integrate their 5-MeO-DMT experiences. Just keeping in mind that I work with an international clientele every week. There is definitely a demand for these skills and this set of knowledge, and I'm looking to impart that to students who are looking to become active in the integration space and have a level of expertise and knowledge around 5-MeO-DMT that I think is required to really help clients integrate this very, very unique and very, very powerful molecule. You can find more information about the course at my personal webpage, martinball.net, or at my integration webpage, nondualentheogenicintegration.com, or you can go directly to the Mindscape Institute website at mindscapeinstitute.org, and you can opt in to get more information there. But just know enrollment is now open, so it's time to act. Feel free to shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com if you have any questions or would like to ask me anything directly about the class. So those are my announcements for this week. We do have a special treat available for you, the listener, at the conclusion of my interview with Tom. Nix Ingen, who is currently going by the moniker of Nixie Gaia, has released a new track that she has made in conjunction with AI that she is calling Luna Gaia. And the song is I Am I, a medicine song for planetary awakening. She describes it as born from a deep medicine ceremony. This song is Gaia's voice emerging through human consciousness, recognizing that all separation is illusion and that the healing of our world begins with the radical shift from we, they, us, them, to I am I. And I thought that this would be an appropriate song to put in at the conclusion of this conversation with Tom, as Tom and I are really talking about the ways that divisiveness and identity politics have created various camps within the psychedelic movement that is definitely not promoting a sense of we're kind of all in it together. It's actually promoting more of a sense of us against them. And so I thought, why not, since Nix brought this song to my attention, why not put it at the end of this conversation with Tom as sort of a interesting counterbalance or counterweight? So that's going to be available at the end of this 2-hour-long talk with Tom. So that's enough in terms of announcements and introductions. Let's go ahead and get into this talk. Again, Tom's new book is Psychedelic Injustice: How Identity Politics Poisons the Psychedelic Renaissance. I hope you enjoy this perhaps provocative conversation with Tom Hatsis. Well, I am very excited to welcome back onto the Entheogenic Evolution podcast for the umpteenth time. I'm not even sure what number we're at now, but Tom Hatsis, a colleague and author who lives up on the other end of the beautiful state of Oregon, up there in Portland. We are back on the podcast to talk about his latest book. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've done interviews for all three of your other books as well. We did The Witch's Ointment, we did The Mystery Schools, the LSD.
Yeah. I don't know that we ever did for Microdosing Magic, but I think that all the other ones we have.
Okay. So
and recorded an audiobook together for The Witch's Ointment.
Yeah. Which that was a marathon.
Yeah.
And so those book interviews plus the many talks that you have given down here in Ashland that I recorded and have put out on the podcast over the many, many years that this podcast has been around now, continues to make you one of, if not the most featured person on the podcast. I don't know if I've had more of anybody else other than Tom. That you might be my top.
Yay.
Yeah, Tom's my top.
Yeah, finally.
So, Tom, we are here today to talk about your new book, which, as I just shared with you, I basically spent my week reading. This is not a short book. This is not a detail light book in any way, shape, or form, as your books tend to be. This is detail and research heavy. But to share it with the audience, it is Psychedelic Injustice: How Identity Politics Poisons the Psychedelic Renaissance. Very provocative title. I could give a little summary of the book, but maybe I'll just leave that to you. Or I can if you like. What would you like to do? Do you want to give a little summary, or do you want me to give a little reader's summary after having been through it?
I'm curious as to what you would think about it. Like, I already know what I think about it, so.
Okay. So just to encapsulate this and explain it to people, as I would say, this is a book about how various narratives, and by narratives here what we mean is meaning-making stories and constructs that in some cases are generated by particular worldviews or ideologies that present a compelling picture of reality on a variety of different fronts. But when you dig down into the granular details, as you do as a historian and as a researcher, what you start to find is that a lot of the things that, quote, everybody believes to be true actually aren't factually true. And therefore, these are narratives, that these are fanciful stories that give people a certain sense of meaning and value and purpose, but they're based on misinterpretations, falsehoods, and in some cases, just outright lies or just blatantly incorrect information. And that you've broken them down into various different categories within the different parts of the book. So we have the decolonized narrative, the racist narrative, and the gender narrative. And basically, you poke holes in all of these, and not just for the sake of poking holes in people's narratives, but also showing how these have negatively impacted contemporary psychedelic culture, psychedelic research, and how things are shared via social media and online and in our contemporary information landscape. And as a reader of this book, I just want to thank you for doing the research. And this is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot these days of do your own research. And you, Tom, you're actually someone who doesn't just Google shit and say, I've done my research, I Googled this. You actually do academic research. And so I hope that's going to be a part of our conversations. What the fuck is the difference between doing your own research and actually doing research? And I'll just throw one thing out there where when you're talking about cannabis and you say, well, everybody knows that cannabis laws started as a racist program in the United States. And I would say, yeah, I was one of those people that, yeah, I knew that.
Me too.
Yeah. And then you get into the details. It's not true. There's no evidence to support that.
And plenty of evidence to suggest otherwise.
Yes. And so that's just one little aspect of what you're discussing in this book. And so that's why, again, I want to thank you for actually doing the research, because it is eye-opening that, those of us in the psychedelic movement, we like to think that, yeah, we've done our research and we know things. But as I would say, as an expression of culture, really what I find in like reading through the book is that psychedelics are really thoroughly embedded within culture. And culture, not that I want to support postmodernism, okay, because I don't. I agree with you. Postmodernism is just kind of fucked up. But like leaning on Foucault, that his idea that knowledge or truth is ultimately just power that is negotiated among power structures within society, that at the sociological level, I would say that's true in the sense that people use information to create stories, to create power for themselves. And it doesn't really matter if those stories or references are based on things that are true. They're based on things that we want to assert are true, because then that achieves a level of power for ourselves. Now, at the deeper philosophical level, the problem with postmodernism is that it says that there is no such thing as objective truth. There's no objective reality. It's all just a choose your own reality, fucked up story. And that's something that I fundamentally have always disagreed with. But at the social level, that, yeah, people make shit up and then use that to justify themselves or their position of power.
Yeah. I mean, to several of your points, I don't think the postmodernists got everything wrong. Like, there are certain aspects of it, like, for example, the idea that we all read from our own perspective, right? Sure, that's true, but, the church fathers knew that back in the ancient days. They all knew that, which is why they all wrote different commentaries, because they knew that everybody's up. Even though we consider it a postmodern principle, it's actually the literate societies have known that for, hundreds of years. As far as the narratives that I discuss in the book, look, the truth is, like, there are kernels of truth to some of those narratives. And that's why I think it's so easy for us to buy the whole thing.
Yeah.
Instead of taking it with a grain of salt, we take it with a pound of sugar and it goes down nice and sweet. But, I don't want to discount that. It's like, yeah, there are racist people in the United States. Like, I don't think you'd have to be barking mad to deny that. What I deny about it is that the psychedelic renaissance or the psychedelic movement is filled with these racist people, which is something we'll hear, particularly from like Curated Institute or Symposia, or even individuals, I think like Dr. Carl Hart. I'm not 100% sure, so I won't invoke him, but certainly Chacruna Institute and Symposia. And it's like, look, we can all agree that they're racist people, but I mean, you go to the MAP Psychedelic Sciences Conference, I mean, who's the racist person there? What is it, maybe one out of 15,000 people, So it's more of the exaggerations of the narratives, not denying, the truth, the kernels of truth to the narratives, but just sort of making it a little bit more proportional towards, I guess, what we could call, for lack of a better term, our everyday reality. I mean, I've been involved in psychedelic research for 25 years. And I mean, honestly, the most racist people I've ever encountered are the ones calling everybody else racist, like all the time. They're more the ones that I see actually behaving in those ways and having the kinds of thoughts that could be deemed racist.
Yeah. So I just kind of want to throw out another little example, and then we'll sort of backtrack. This idea, again, of there are kernels of truth, but then there's also some things that are maybe conveniently overlooked or just not even considered, and that then we create a narrative, and that creates a false picture of reality. So one of the things that you talk about in the book, and I really wanted to give this example because I encountered this directly, is that this idea that anybody working in the world of psychedelics has to, quote, honor and respect indigenous wisdom around psychedelics because they're the ones who had them first, and so we have to honor and acknowledge them and make that a part of all of our discourse around psychedelics. And as you point out in the book, yes, many indigenous cultures have used psychedelics. But when we actually get into the history of it, we see that there's a lot of conflicting views within indigenous cultures themselves around psychedelics. So we can't just make overly generalized comments like, oh yeah, all Native Americans live in perfect peace and harmony with nature, and they use these medicines in a way that is integral and that we need to learn from them. So here's my example. And I have a few more that maybe I'll bring up as we go through the conversation. But the example is from my field work out at the Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico, that it's actually a combination of three different cultures of Chiricahua, Mescalero, and Lipan Apache. And the Lipan, following the racist history of the United States, the Lipan were almost completely wiped out in Texas. They were almost complete genocide. And so only like 35 Lipans survived in Texas, and they ended up joining the Mescalero Apache tribe quite some time ago. They had had an indigenous peyote ritual, but that ritual complex basically died out when they joined Mescalero, because Mescaleros, even though their name is Mescalero, it doesn't come from mescaline. Mescaleros don't use peyote. And then later, peyote was introduced to the Mescalero, and the internal commentary at Mescalero was that ultimately it led to too much rivalry among the different ceremonial leaders. And so they eventually decided, like, we don't want anything to do with peyote. And so all this was, around 100 years ago. So they used it a little bit, and then they got rid of it. And by the time I was doing my field work in the late 1990s, the majority of opinion among Mescalero medicine people is that peyote is make-believe religion. And they didn't want anything to do with it. And so here, if we just take this simplistic view, like all Native people respect these earth medicines and these visionary medicines, that's too simplistic. It covers over the actual historical truth and the cultural and lived realities of indigenous communities. So I just wanted to share that because it's like, yeah, this is what Tom's talking about.
Yeah. I wish I would have spoken you to put that example in the book because that's like, you're 100% correct. That's a great example of, the theme of what I'm talking about here, like within the book that, yeah, I mean, there's peyote religions disappeared for all different kinds of reasons. Some of it had to do with colonization, 100%. Like nobody, again, you'd have to be raving mad to deny that. But a lot of it also had to do with examples like you just stated, and also the younger generations just not being interested in it. I mean, even today, on, let's say, a reservation, there is literally nothing stopping anybody who lives on a reservation from giving up their houses and their cars and all the modern amenities that they enjoy and going and living like their ancestors lived. There's nothing stopping them, and yet they're not doing that. Why? Well, because, turns out people like indoor plumbing and air conditioning and the internet and lights that work and refrigerators and things like that. So it's this weird sort of balancing act where we don't want to just trash the past because there's so much wisdom in the past. There really is. And that includes, of course, indigenous wisdom. But we also want to be realistic about, look, the creature comforts that we all enjoy. And again, so much of, or I shouldn't say so much, but, there is evidence, and I have some receipts in the book that point to, again, younger generations just not being interested in, for lack of a better term, what we could call the old ways. They're like, no, I want a modern house,
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to my own fieldwork at the Mescalero Reservation, people were much more concerned about making sure they had electricity and water and accurate integration into modern society than they were. I mean, yes, they used teepees for ceremonies, And they build ceremonial arbors for ceremonies and, basically like camping out there. But other than that, everybody wanted to live in homes. And what they were most interested in is, do we have fair distribution of resources here on the reservation? And at the time, there was a very highly corrupt tribal president. And so that's what the concerns were about, is like, how is this guy, he's like taking money and getting all the prime housing for his relatives and his supporters, but people who don't support him, their electricity is being cut off. They don't have access to water. They don't have access to new homes. Like, they weren't looking to decolonize and let's just all go back to living in teepees. They wanted modern houses. And that was a huge concern out at the Navajo reservation, the Diné people at the time that I was doing my research. And I assume that it still is, that they would like electricity and water and things like that.
Yeah, and there's also, I quote in my book Belinda Ariaco, who is part DNA as well, and she says that it's this sort of stereotypical noble savage sort of racist idea. I don't know if she realizes how racist it is, and I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she doesn't. But this idea that she says that, like, there's this Native American philosophy where all creatures are honored, from the tiniest insects to, the largest person. That is just not even close to true,
No.
like, at all. And this just gets back to that whole painting a narrative, and the issue with it is that if you have one group of people, like let's say the Belinda Ariacos of psychedelia, who believe that another group of people, let's say the Martin Ball and Tom Hatsises of psychedelia, that our ancestors are the only ones who did anything messed up, well, there's no way that we can actually have a conversation, because we're just evil, and Belinda Ariaco's without sin because she's indigenous. And I mean, again, when you go back and look, through the actual records, I mean, indigenous peoples were, they were more misogynist than Europeans. They colonized more than Europeans. They were far more brutal in terms of slavery and war than most Europeans. And again, depending on the different community, of course, because I don't want to do that thing where you just sort of put a blanket term, over a bunch of people that had different cultures and different languages, different cosmologies, and all that stuff. But, the truth is there was a level of brutality that would probably still exist on this continent had the Europeans not intervened. And I know that that's, might be a really tough pill for some people to swallow, but I mean, just do the math. These different peoples, they were still very much kidnapping each other, enslaving each other, sacrificing each other, cannibalizing each other. And, what mechanisms were in place that would have ever stopped that, like within these own tribal societies? Well, nothing really. The only thing that stopped it was Europeans coming over here and essentially saying, look, when we talk about the rampant tribal warfare that used to take place, or rather we don't talk about it because we're not allowed to talk about it. But look, the thing that stopped that was the reservation system. Believe it or not, the reservation system saved a lot of lives and stopped a lot of people from becoming enslaved. So, you have to take the good with the bad, especially when dealing with history, because there is no all good or all bad with history. History is a web, and each little line of that web, some of it's good, some of it's bad, and it all sort of mixes together. So, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that we just need to be a little bit more honest about the common brutality of all of our ancestors. Say, hey, that wasn't cool. Maybe we shouldn't do that to each other today.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And that it's far more complex than kind of this simplistic reductionism of you're either an oppressor or you're a victim. Yeah. And if you're an oppressor, then we're going to hold you accountable for being an oppressor, whether that's you or that was your ancestors, right? That's part of the problem, is this idea that we're going to hold current white people responsible for oppression that perhaps happened in the past, and then painting the victims as being above reproach or blame. And as you say, it actually supports, like when we're dealing with indigenous communities, it supports the racist trope of the noble savage, where everything they did was great until Whitey came along and fucked everything up, and abused all of them. And again, it's, as you say, it's not to discount that, yes, there was abuse, there was violence, there was genocide, there was cultural destruction, but there's also things on the other side that maybe were not so great. Like one of the things you mentioned, I believe is in the book, and this was part of Mescalero culture as well, Mescalero Apache culture. If a woman was caught in adultery, her nose was cut off.
Yeah, the Comanche. I talked about it within the culture of the Comanche, but
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Mescalero Apache also. It wouldn't surprise me if they did that too.
Yeah. And when you talk about warfare, I mean, there was pretty much constant warfare between the Comanches and the Mescaleros, and then the Mescaleros and the Pueblos,
And the Utes as well.
yeah. And when you get into the question of, well, if we give the land back, who are we giving it to? Like the Mescalero themselves, they have their territory in New Mexico, but they're part of Athabascan culture. And Athabascans actually come from Alaska and Canada, like the Apaches and the Navajo, the Dene. And so they actually were invaders into the Southwest. And so, like even on the Mescalero Reservation, there are Pueblo pictographs. So we can see like Pueblo people used to live here. They don't live here anymore. And I'm not trying to share any of this in order to issue any kind of blame to the Mescalero, because, I mean, the people living in Mescalero today, they're just trying to live their lives like everybody else. But it's not as simple as somebody came in and ruined everything for people who were living in a perfectly peaceful, harmonious way. It's just not the historical truth. And one last little example that I wanted to give around kind of the noble savage of they're in perfect harmony with all of nature and all beings and all of that. One of the things that was really hard for me personally out at Mescalero is I'm quite fond of snakes, and anybody who follows me on Facebook or Instagram know that my son and I are out there like catching snakes like all the time.
Yep.
But in Mescalero culture, snakes are associated with witchcraft. They are considered to be bad and evil, and regardless of what species of snake it is, and I saw this happen, which is why it was so hard for me. Any snake that is discovered at Mescalero will be promptly killed. Doesn't matter if it's venomous. It doesn't matter if it's a rattlesnake or a gopher snake. It doesn't matter. It's a snake, therefore it's bad, and we're going to kill it. And I saw that happen a few times. And as a snake lover, that definitely, as sort of a naive graduate student, it was like, oh, I thought you're supposed to like live in harmony with like all the living beings. Like, isn't that what Pocahontas said? Isn't that what we've been taught as like what the indigenous worldview is? And for them, it's like, no, man, this shit's bad. Like we're gonna kill it. And then
because there's no such thing as an indigenous worldview.
No, there isn't.
That's the thing. There's no such any more than there's a such thing as like traditional ayahuasca ceremony. It's like, well, who are you talking about? There's different traditions, But again, it's just this way that we sort of, it's that oppressor-oppressed narrative thing. It's just easier to lump everyone into one side and say you are the oppressed, and pay no mind at all to what makes them unique beyond being seen as oppressed. I mean, that's one of the weirdest things about this is people will talk about, oh, diversity, this, diversity, that. Well, when you lump everyone under the same category, you're not being very diverse. When you completely ignore, the less pretty things, the less nice things about different cultures, you're not being very diverse at all. It's like, are we looking for diversity and to take each culture on their own merits and demerits? Well, that's what I'd like to do. But it seems like we're only allowed to do that with some cultures and not others. Like you and I are technically not allowed socially to be having this conversation because I'm not indigenous in any way, shape, or form, at least to the United States or anything. I don't know. I don't think you are either, right? Or you have a little something, or
No, I don't have it all. But
so we're pretty screwed here, man.
Yeah, but I'll share this with you and with the listening audience, because here again is where we kind of get into the complexities of things that if we're just lumping everyone together, like obviously you and I, we are white men. I have no indigenous ancestry from the Americas in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, I can even trace on my mom's side of the family, we had folks on the fucking Mayflower, okay? So It goes back that far for my family. But
That's cool.
when we get into the complexities of things, my great grandfather on my mom's side of the family was Secretary of the Interior under FDR. And he was part of the New Deal. And part of his job was actually developing housing, water, and power on Native American reservations as Secretary of the Interior of the United States. And so he had a lot of connections with Native American communities. And so my grandfather, his son, actually at the end of his time in high school, ended up being invited to an Ojibwe community outside of Chicago. And it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, but my grandfather ended up living with them for like a year and a half. He became fluent in the Ojibwe language. He was probably the only white man that I know of that was initiated fully into the Medi-Winwin, the Ojibwe Grand Medicine Society. And then after that, his mother actually was a senator in New Mexico. And so my grandfather ended up moving in with the Navajo, and he lived in a traditional hogan, and he wore Navajo clothing. He became fluent in Navajo and became initiated as a Navajo Blessing Way singer. And then after that, he went to Oklahoma, and he lived with a group of Lakotas who had been displaced into Oklahoma, and he also became fluent in Lakota. I mean, my grandfather's language abilities just blow my mind. He also became fluent in like Russian and German and World War II. But anyway, he became fluent in Lakota, and he was initiated into Vision Quest, Uwipi, Sundance, and also Peyote Way among the Lakota. And so if we want to talk about like ancestors and what rights your ancestors give you, like, well, my grandfather lived in Native American cultures and became fluent in their languages and became fluent within their traditions. That doesn't make me Native, but it complicates the picture if we just want to rely on the tropes of white person, oppressor, Native person, perfect harmony. It's much, much more complicated than that. Yeah. And so me as a child growing up, I wasn't disillusioned until I'm not quite sure the age, but some neighbor down the street said that he was like part Chippewa or something like that. And I was like, oh, I don't know what my tribe was. So I ran home and I found my mom. I was like, Mom, what Indian tribe are we? And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, but Grandpa is an Indian, right? She's like, no, like we have Irish German ancestry. And that was a real eye opener for me because the first however many years of my life, I thought we were Native American just based on my grandfather because that's part of how he lived. And his house was filled with Native American artifacts. So I just assumed like we're Native, but we weren't.
Yeah. I mean, getting to what you're talking about, just sort of like how it's a lot more complex. So my fiance is Iroquois. She does not care about that at all. She doesn't use it as like a social club to beat people over the head with it. Like, oh, you will listen to like, she doesn't care. Like, I care more about this stuff than she does. I mean, your grandfather and you personally, Martin, care far more about this than she does. And I mean, she's Iroquois and Pacific Islander. It means nothing to her. She doesn't care, So it's just weird, She doesn't see herself as oppressed at all. She would never want to live in a tribal society. She loves modern life, She loves going to punk shows. She loves going to the dispensary and all that stuff, She just doesn't. It doesn't appeal to her at all.
Yeah.
Like, you and I are more interested in it than she's ever going to be.
But as you discuss about in the book, this is an area where if she wanted to use that to get automatic access to cred,
she'd get it.
She'd get it. She could use that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. I mean, you know that, anybody like that's, I don't even bother going to conferences anymore because they're just really boring and weak. And there's no like people are talking about things that they have really no credibility speaking about anymore. It's just like, well, as a this fill in the blank, I get to speak on this topic. It's like, well, do you? Because like, not to be a jerk, but I know a little bit about that topic, and everything you just said is wrong. Like everything you just said is a trope or based on something you saw on TikTok or something, or maybe a meme floating around Instagram or Facebook, but nothing what you just stated in your presentation is factually accurate at all. And we have plenty of receipts, to sort of back that stuff up. I was at a conference at Spirit Plant Medicine conference, and I don't want to say the woman's name because I'm not big on calling people out publicly, but she had brought up the whole Santa Claus Amanita Muscaria thing, and
Right.
one of my favorite topics. And
I know.
yeah, without knowing
Look out,
that
Tom's in the audience. Don't say it. Don't say it.
yeah, but I mean, what she didn't know was that I've actually looked very deeply into that, and I don't want to get stuck on that. But after her talk, I just asked her, I'm like, I'm like just curious, like because I've looked pretty deep into this. Where are you getting your information from? And she just went, oh, just Google it. And it's like, well, that's not really. It's like you had brought up before with like when people say, oh, do your own research. It's like, yeah, that's like telling somebody like me, oh, just fix your own car's transmission. I don't know how to fix a transmission. I need a mechanic to do that. And so we think that because we have access to Google that we actually know how to do research. And don't get me wrong, Google is a great starting point. But for far too many people, they see it as an ending point. Like, I'm going to pretty much put my opinion in the search engine and see what comes up. Well, yeah, a million things that point to you being correct are going to come up. But if you really want to know the truth, ask the opposite of what it is you're trying to find. Like that's as just one thing to do, like start off with why am I wrong about this, and then follow that and see where it leads you.
Okay, so we're at a point where I just really want to share another one of my own personal examples, and then I'm going to back up and I'm going to redirect us a little bit in the conversation. But going back to how things are presented, say at like conferences, and where identity comes in, and how identity is used as authoritative rather than factual information. So this also comes from the time when I was a graduate student, and I think that I was at Boston for the American Academy of Religions conference. I'm pretty sure that that's where this took place. And so there's a little subset within that was the indigenous religions group. And that was made up in part of Native people who were working on their advanced degrees, and many of them were studying their own cultures. And then also some white folks like me who are very interested in indigenous culture and Native religion. And this was not part of the larger public conference, but it was just within the Native religion group itself. And I forget the exact details. I actually wrote about this in my memoir, Being Infinite, so the details are in there if anybody's curious. But something came up where I happened to mention that at the Inn of the Mountain Gods, I think we were talking about commercialization of Native culture. And I think I was making the point that, well, Native cultures sometimes commercialize themselves as well. It's not necessarily coming from outside. So at the time, there was the Inn of the Mountain Gods at Mescalero Apache Reservation in New Mexico. And that's named after, you can see the picture way back there. That is a mountain god. That's a spirit dancer. And that was what I was studying as a graduate student. These masked male dancers that are called gahe in the Mescalero language, which is sometimes translated as mountain gods, but it's more like mountain spirit. It would be more accurate. So anyway, I mentioned, well, they put up this great big hotel and casino, called it Inn of the Mountain Gods, and then put up some teepees out back. And, so that's kind of selling Native culture. And mostly it's like rich white people coming from Texas. And I said, and the Mescaleros are more than happy to take their money. You want to come to Mescalero and gamble? Awesome. You want to check out the teepees? Awesome. Anyway, there was another woman there who claimed that she had Mescalero ancestry, which I was not able to confirm in any way. But anyway, she claimed to be part Mescalero. And then she made the comments like, and Mescaleros, Apaches, they don't even use teepees, that they just use wiki-ups. And it was done in a way, in a sense, to kind of present me as being naive, because I wasn't like dinging them for putting up teepees. And at that point, because the energy of the room seemed to be like young white graduate student, ignorant, we're going to laugh a little bit about him. I didn't say anything, but she's absolutely 100% wrong. Teepees are what mescaleros lived in up until the reservation period when they started building houses. And she said, no, they used wiki-ups, which is a Western Apache term coming from cultures in Arizona, not in New Mexico. And a wiki-up is a brush arbor shelter that was used by Western Apaches. But Mescalero Apaches, they lived in teepees, and they called them kuwongs, which is similar to the Navajo word of hogan, which means traditional home. Mm-hmm. And so it's 100% a part of their culture. And I didn't feel that it would be allowed for me actually to correct her, because I'm the white guy, I'm the oppressor. And that I didn't feel that there was even space for me to say, well, actually, yeah, teepees are their traditional housing. You were 100% wrong by saying that they never used teepees. But that's what we're talking about here, is that identity trumps reality.
Yeah.
Because the narrative is more important than the actual truth.
Yeah. I find, honestly, like this obsession with identity that we're seeing sort of in society recently. I don't know. I just don't find it very interesting. I think that identity is one of the least interesting things about a person. Like when somebody starts rattling off all of their like identity bona fides, all I could think of, well, you forgot to tell me your favorite color also, which is just as interesting as all that other stuff you just said. When people, I call them taglines, and it's like, as a intersex feminist justice activist, whatever, on and on and on and on. It's like, okay, all that's great. Now what's actually interesting about you? Because that isn't. There's nothing interesting about that, or at least I can't find anything interesting about it. And the shame of it is that I think because people find it interesting, they're not actually digging into themselves to see what actually makes them interesting. And I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just being self-centered and greedy, but I'd like to see more people sort of live a deeper truth, and merely citing, an identity, or even more so, an identity that you believe gives you an expert perspective on an issue. I don't know that there's a such thing as that. I don't think there is. This whole, like, as I was saying, like, well, as a fill in the blank, I'm going to speak on this topic. I mean, I mentioned Belinda Ariaco as she's one example of that. Francine Douglas, who I write about in the book, and I don't have anything against any of these people. I just want to make sure I say that. But just to point out the examples, like Francine Douglas believes that because she's a member of the Stolo people, she has some rich connection with mushrooms. First and foremost, I mean, traditionally, the Stolo, we don't even know if they used mushrooms all that long ago in the past, because you'd be hard-pressed to find mushrooms growing up there in the Fraser Valley in Canada. Really not too much room. Like, it gets pretty cold. Yeah, the summers are hot, and if there's a cow there, but again, they didn't have domesticated animals. So what I'm getting at is, if these people did use mushrooms, it's only very recently and that they did so. And the story that Francine Douglas told about, the 200 indigenous bodies buried under Kamloops, I'm sure you've heard of that story. Even outside, there are no children buried under the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So when Francine Douglas says, well, and I'm paraphrasing here, I'm an indigenous woman and the mushrooms gave me this truth, it's like, No, you just made that up in your head because you believe you have some connection to these sacraments that your people most likely don't actually have. Because, I mean, using psychedelics among indigenous people, again, like we tend to think that it was just this sort of like psychedelic free for all. That's not true at all. Most of the peoples of this continent were nomadic, and by default, nomadic people don't exactly know everything that's around them because they're constantly moving. Sorry, my elbow keeps cracking. 13 years of roller derby will do that. But you know, a lot of these people, what I'm getting at is they didn't even use psychedelics. I mean, the bulk of the people of indigenous communities that use psychedelics would all be found around sort of the Texas Mexican, you know, what we today would call Texas and Mexican border, like around there. Of course, into South America as well. But up in the continental United States, Canada, I mean, you didn't really have a lot of psychedelic use among indigenous peoples. I mean, it's just not in the records anywhere, which
No.
again makes sense because, you know, peyote, which was the main one, and mushrooms, like those grow in abundance in, you know, the strip of now modern Texas and Mexico where peyote grows, and in Mexico with psilocybe mexicana. Yeah, they grow abundantly there, but that shit's not growing in North Dakota, dude.
Yeah.
like, like, so, and also one last thing, if I could say on this point, people exaggerate how occupied this land actually was in 1492. It wasn't very occupied at all. The going number of actual inhabitants stretching all the way from the southernmost tip of South America all the way into Canada, we're talking about 8 to 10 million people in all of it. So again, like most of this land was not occupied by anybody. Most of this land, specifically the Midwest, is completely uninhabitable without modern amenities. We were also going through a little ice age in 1492. I don't know if enough, or if a lot of people know that, but yeah, the bulk of this continent was uninhabitable. So, you know,
Yeah.
just throwing that out there.
Yeah. And just to jump on the North American psychedelic use, because this also, I mean, you talk about it in the book, you just mentioned it now, and I just kind of want to reiterate a few things
Sure.
and add even a few more details that, and I've pointed this out in my own books as well. I mean, we're really in alignment on a lot of these issues. I haven't dealt with it as directly as you have within your book, but I've mentioned in my books that ultimately what we conceive of as ancient Native American use of peyote, it's all historically recent in North America because it's all introduced from the peyote way, the peyote church, that none of these cultures in North America or in Canada had any kind of peyote tradition at all. So
No.
it's all just maybe 150 years old at the oldest. So that's not ancient by any stretch of the imagination. And then where we do see, like this was another thing out at Mescalero, and you mentioned these in your book. They did have these little mezcal beans, and actually, I have some here around the house somewhere. I don't have one within like reaching distance where I can grab one. But these are these little red beans, and for many mescaleros and in many indigenous cultures in North America, they use these as ceremonial decoration, and they know these little beans, they'll get you high. But they don't actually use them that way. So it becomes part of the jewelry that you wear for ceremony because it has, medicine power, but they don't actually ever consume that. And then when we look at, particularly through the American Southwest on into Southern California, what we do find is that there are a lot of cultures that made use of datura. And their datura is often associated with sorcery and witchcraft and rather nefarious doings, like necrophilia and associations
By
with
necrophilia or necromancy?
necrophilia.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So if you read some of the Dine Bahane, the Navajo creation stories, that there are portions where there is sex with corpses in order to collect the semen to use for purposes of witchcraft. And also, this is where we get like skinwalkers with the idea of like werewolves and, shapeshifters and transformers. I don't mean like the robots, not those kind of transformers.
Thank you for clarifying.
And then in some cultures, the datura use is associated with healing and shamanism, but it's actually more generally associated with more darker arts and what would be considered witchcraft and sorcery. And we don't hear anybody in the psychedelic movement going up on stage and saying, yeah, so we want to support the indigenous use of datura. And
Yeah, right.
as we also know, like, that shit's like really fucking dangerous to use.
Yeah.
You can die from that, and it also can produce brain damage. And so we're not celebrating that as part of the modern psychedelic renaissance or psychedelic movement. And if we want to talk about actual, like, historical use of mind-altering plants in North America, that's it's probably the top one. But it's not part of the discourse because it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the story. And then it'd be even more blatant. Like if you go into a psilocybin facilitator training program in Oregon, and I want to talk about this we're doing all the social justice stuff that's going on there. They started talking about datura use. Like people going through that program would like rightfully stand up and say, what the fuck does this have to do with giving people psilocybin mushrooms? Like datura and mushrooms, not related at all. What's the point? But because it's been put into this, we need to honor indigenous cultures and their historical use of the medicines. Like I interviewed somebody a few weeks ago on psilocybin training programs, and he had mentioned that, yeah, we had all this stuff about indigenous use of psychedelics. And my response to that was like, I don't know of any Oregon tribes that ever use psilocybin mushrooms. I don't know what that has to do with psilocybin in Oregon. And he's like, yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, I gave a talk at a facilitator training school called Clinical Cognitive, and which rolls off the tongue very easily. No kidding. And so I went over, pretty much some of the things from the book, and I want to say to my shock, but it wasn't really shocking at all. The people in the classroom, they had been through, the indigenous, training protocol of their program, and they had no idea that the majority, or just as one example, that with the Aztecs, that only the Aztec male elites were allowed to eat mushroom. They had no idea. They thought, oh, women and regular guys on the street. Nope. They had no idea that the priests would sacrifice people while on mushrooms. They had no idea that part of the ceremony was then eating the bodies of they hadn't heard about any of this stuff. And it's like, well, what did you guys learn about? And just the normal tropes that, oh, everybody was eating peyote, sitting around a fire, singing Kumbaya, having, that indigenous people, they were, engaged in what, we today would call psychedelic psychotherapy, and Western doctors sold. It's like, wait, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. I mean, when you go back, I mean, I looked at countless anthropological records from people staying with different indigenous groups. And I mean, the things that they're describing are just very different from the tropes that we hear today.
Yeah. And that just makes me think of another example. I'm not even getting to the questions that I wanted to ask you, but we're going to get there. We've got time. We're going to get there.
We got time.
But again, kind of coming from that naive perspective of, it was all very egalitarian in Native cultures around use of these medicines and things like that. And one of the things that kind of jarred me as a graduate student is I was doing a lot of reading about the Huichol. And there we have, like Peter First and Barbara Meyerhoff doing their research down among the Huichol. And something that stood out that really surprised me was that there was a bit more egalitarian in the sense that everybody does have the opportunity to eat peyote, including the children. But it was quite clearly stated in their anthropological studies that only the Mata Akame, only the shaman, is the only one who has visions that have any meaning whatsoever to them. For everybody else, it is merely entertainment and just an enjoyable experience. But only the shaman's visions have any authority to them. So, like, if we were to go back to what you mentioned about this person talking about, well, I ate the mushrooms and they told me that these dead bodies were buried at this boarding school, which we now know is not true at all. If we were to put it into like that Huichol indigenous context, well, if you're not the shaman, and to be a shaman, you have to go through a 10-year apprenticeship. And then you learn how to interpret your visions and derive meaning and authority from them. That if we're following that model, this person's not an authority to say whether their mushroom visions have any kind of meaning whatsoever. If we're following that indigenous Huichol model. But again, as we've already stated, there is no such thing as the Native American worldview. So applying Huichol standards to somebody speaking in Canada is fucking stupid, actually.
Yeah, and again, we only have modern reports of how Huichol like dealt with peyote, and there's no way to know. But my guess is that before Western interventionism, women were probably not allowed to participate, just because it was so, and I don't know, of course, I'm taking a guess here, but because it was so widespread among, again, the few groups that did use peyote or mushrooms, where it was only the men were allowed, and in some cases only elite men were allowed. But the early, do we have anything, and perhaps we do, before Carl Lumholtz's Unknown Mexico, where he describes the Huichol peyote practices. This is in the
Yeah. I
late
think he's the
1800s,
first.
early 19. What's that?
I think he is the first.
So Hugh's the first, but he does mention that the Huichols were familiar with Christianity, meaning they were touched by Western civilization somewhat. And I'm curious if before Westerners had reached the Huichol, if women were actually allowed to participate or not, because Western civilization had already gone through its first sort of feminist movement before explorers reached the Huichol. So I don't know what happened there. I'd be curious. I'm happy that they allow women today. But that, again, is one of those, we hear, or you and I hear all the time, that, Western doctors stole these protocols. And it's like, well, if we stole these protocols from indigenous peoples, why do we allow women to sit with the medicine?
Yeah.
Because that's a Western thing. That's not an indigenous thing. That's a Western thing. Why do we let guys that are not, our version of their elite men, let's say billionaires or whatever? If you're not a millionaire or a billionaire, you can still sit with mushrooms. You can still go see a facilitator. Well, a lot of indigenous communities weren't like that, So again, I'm wondering what exactly the West stole, because I can't find anything in the protocols.
Yeah. And this is something that you brought up in the book, and I really love this one as well, because it's the complete opposite of what we are doing in the modern psychedelic therapy space, where you point out that, like with Maria Sabina, and I've seen this in other cultures as well, where it's the shaman who takes the medicine and then diagnoses for the patient. It's not, as a patient, you are not being served mushrooms or ayahuasca or peyote. You go to the doctor takes the medicine and then does their ritual, does their magic, does whatever it is that they do, or then figures out, oh, these are the herbs that we want to give you, and these are the prayers that you want you to say. That is not the modern therapeutic protocol in any way, shape, or form. And in fact, like here in Oregon with our psilocybin program, as a facilitator, if you take any of the medicine, you have lost your license.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's the exact
opposite.
So why are we training people around indigenous use of psychedelics in our psilocybin therapy program? It doesn't make sense.
Well, because again, it makes sense only in service to the narrative. What it's done to make it so that these people on this side know everything and are righteous and good and holy, and you on this side are just a pathetic pile of dirt, and you know nothing, and without instruction from these people, you are just ignorant of the world. And I don't buy that. I mean, like, I just did 3 nights of ayahuasca 2 weekends ago, and I kept a stricter dieta than both facilitators did. I don't facilitate ayahuasca. I just take the dieta seriously. As of recently, I started to. And I don't mean that in a braggy way. I just mean like these two were trained in this. And I mean, I was watching throughout the week, and I mean, they were breaking dieta. I never did. So, and I have no training. I'm not from South America. I have cooked ayahuasca, but besides that, I have no formal training of anything. So.
Yeah. So even just having the cred of having been through the training, yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being more authentic within the tradition than, say, yourself as a participant.
Yeah.
Because again, it's about the people. It's not about the identity. It's not about the labels. It's about the people. What are people choosing to do?
Yeah, I
So,
mean, you'd hope so.
yeah. So speaking about people, let's go back to you, Tom. So this is
Okay.
what I've been wanting to ask you, like for the last hour, but it's been so exciting just to jump into all these different topics and examples. Is I just wanted to go back with, okay, what inspired writing the book in the first place, and then how did you go about deciding that you were going to focus on these particular narratives? To remind the listeners of the decolonized narrative, the racist narrative, and the gender narrative. So let's just go back to the formulation of the book as your next research project.
Sure. So I started, it started with me actually researching police shootings in the United States. I had gotten real curious around end of 2018 into 2019. I just got curious about it. And when I started digging into it, I realized that not only were the narratives very much incomplete around police shootings in the United States, but that groups like Chacruna Institute and Symposia were pumping out these narratives that are very divisive and are totally wrong. And then I might hold the record of having read more of what has been produced by Chacruna Institute than probably anyone else in psychedelia. I spent a good while, and they publish a lot, so there's a lot to go through. And having just studied, psychedelic history for pretty much my entire adult life, I was just seeing things within their literature that was just not making any sense to me at all. Then somebody from the Chacruna Chronicles, I think this guy, his name is Osiris, if I'm not mistaken. He put something out there about the holy mushroom and Christian art, another one of my favorite
Right.
topics in psychedelia.
Yeah, you're
And
poking Tom there. You're poking him.
was that?
Is that they're poking you? They don't know it, but you're poking Tom.
Yeah,
You're going to put that out there.
yeah. It got to a point where I I don't know, and I don't want to be uncharitable to anyone at Chacruna Institute, but it got to a point where I was reading their stuff and I was like, okay, are you guys just lying or do you not know what you're talking about? And to give them the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say they just don't know what they're talking about. And so, yeah, I just got the idea that I'm like, well, I'm not hearing anyone within psychedelia push back against any of this. Because we all know what happens to people who push back against this stuff, your career gets destroyed. But I felt the need. I mean, my career wasn't going anywhere anyway. So I'm like, I may as well just poke back a little bit and see if I can get some conversations going around these topics. I don't know that anyone is going to want to have a conversation with me about them because they get completely exposed as, again, either not knowing what they're talking about or just lying. I'll say that they just don't know what they're talking about. But that was really what did it. And as far as why those three topics, it's simply those are the three topics that I heard being trumpeted from Chacruna Institute, Symposia, and guys like Dr. Carl Hart and other people who are sort of in psychedelic spaces but aren't part of any like psychedelic organization, like David Bronner of the Bronner Soap guy. And I like David Bronner. I think he's a really good guy. I think he leads with the heart. But he just buys into this stuff and he doesn't really question any of it. And So I just wanted to say, hey, can we actually have a conversation about this stuff? Because what I'm seeing when I look at the actual receipts, when I look at crime shooting statistics, when I look at crime statistics, when I look at incarceration statistics, what I'm seeing in these numbers is not what you guys are telling me is taking place. And so there's a disconnect there. And when you go back and you check the sources from, the kind of stuff that, gets published by Chacruna Institute, I mean, they're just citing secondary sources from people that agree with them who themselves aren't citing primary sources. So I call it the citation circle jerk, where
Yeah.
everyone is just citing from each other. No one's actually checking, and they're just creating this sort of egregore of a narrative around this topic. And then again, you go in and you take a look, you sort of brush the dirt aside, and you see there's nothing there. And that's a scary thing to say, because people, for some reason, are really attached to things being a lot worse than they are. Like, I would think that saying, hey, by the way, there isn't, as just one example from the book, people talk about this epidemic of police shooting trans women. Now, I mean, I went back and I looked at the actual police reports, the statistics on all of it, and there is nothing that can even be close to call an epidemic of police shooting trans people, trans women specifically. Now, you think that would be cause for celebration, right? It's like, oh, isn't this good news? This isn't happening. Well, no, not to the ideologue. To the ideologue, that's bad that this isn't really taking place, because now they have nothing to do. When you make your whole life about pushing for a narrative or being an activist pushing for this topic, and it turns out there's nothing to it, well, I mean, I guess the ego takes over, and you sort of, what my fiance calls, you ego grasp. You're fighting for this thing to be true, even though it's not at all. I mean, I think the going back to, I think it was in 2000. I think it was 2016 or so to 2023 was when I checked as far as police shooting, trans women. I think there was 5 of them. And in most of the cases, except for, I believe, one, the woman was actually attacking somebody and nobody actually knew that she was trans when she got shot. And the one I found where it did involve a police killing, was a woman named Deanna Mason, who was walking across a highway in the middle of the night, got hit by a car, and it just so happened to be a police car. But this is the kind of stuff that people trump up, say, oh, it's police killing of a trans woman. It's like, no, it's just coincidence that like, she could have been hit by a taxi cab, or a semi trailer or something like that, or an SUV or whatever, a fucking a Cadillac. It doesn't, but when they say they call it a police killing of somebody, it's like you have to look and see, well, what are the actual, like, what's the anatomy, what's the forensics of what happened? And when you take a look at that, a lot of these narratives just sort of collapse.
Yeah. So let's talk about the phrase of primary sources, and let's dig into this a little bit, because I think this is a place where, like you mentioned, the citation circle jerk, that this is something that is fairly endemic in internet culture across the cultural political spectrum. I mean, it's all over the place. So this is not limited to any particular group. This is a problem that's pervasive, and especially we're in now this cultural motif of do your own research. But the problem is that most people, they're not researching deep enough. They're not moving outside of self-reinforcing information bubbles, and most people, I think, don't really understand what a primary source is versus what is a secondary source, what is an interpretation, what is a reuse of a citation that wasn't really there in the first place. So, as a graduate student, this was the thing that I was always taught was you need to go to a primary source don't just rely on the secondary or tertiary, and don't rely just on the interpretations, but you have to go to a primary source. So at the practical level, as a graduate student, if I wanted to study Mescalero Apache mountain spirit ceremonial tradition, I should go to the reservation and I should start talking to Mescaleros. That's the primary source there, and not just be relying on exterior accounts, so that I could see, well, what's really going on the ground, right? So that's just one example. But in this context here, how do we get to those primary sources? Like you mentioned with police reports, but maybe let's if we could use the example of marijuana laws were started for racist purposes. Because again, as you admitted, you thought that was true. I thought that was true. I'm reading your book and it's like, oh shit.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any evidence to support that. So let's talk about that. And what is that process of actually getting to a primary source and these kinds of historical narratives?
Yeah. So one of the issues is that most people begin the marijuana laws, anti-cannabis laws, with Harry Anslinger and the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which also wasn't a racist endeavor, and maybe we'll get into that, but I go really deep into how we know it wasn't in the book. As far as knowing when and how things come into, so like with primary sources, you want to look at local laws first, because local laws, like when things make it to the federal level, it's usually because a state forms a law. In our case with cannabis, it would be Massachusetts. And then other states sort of adopt these laws, and then it becomes federal. Not all the time, but at least with this example, with cannabis, that's what we're talking about. So I went back, and a good way to start is read a secondary source, like a well-researched secondary source piece, and then check their sources, see where are they pulling from. And if they're pulling from an archive, well, that's great. I mean, because that means it's all primary stuff that you're going to find there. So we want to look at laws, diaries, letters, things like that, arrest records, newspaper articles also give us an idea as to what, who was being arrested at what time. So again, the idea of, let's say, during the 1930s, it was just Black Americans and Mexican Americans that were being targeted for cannabis laws. Okay, well, I looked at, I don't even know how many newspapers from the era, and you find a medley of different people being arrested for cannabis. The largest bust of a cannabis grow-op in Brooklyn was stewarded by two Irish guys. In another case, you had an Irish guy and a Mexican guy who were growing and selling cannabis. And that's another thing that we do this weird thing, and it makes sense because the United States was a segregated nation in those days. But that doesn't mean that different people from different ethnic backgrounds didn't hang out with each other. They absolutely did. And in some cases, when, again, you look at arrest records, newspapers citing the arrest, you'll have like, oh, it was a group of people that got arrested. This guy was Italian. This guy was Irish. This guy was Black American. This guy was Asian American. You know, it's like it's all over the place. Like it's impossible to actually find a stereotype when you look for the people who are getting arrested. So those would be good primary sources, especially police reports, to see who was actually getting in trouble. Now, one of the things that where it's kind of racist at the time, and it's a little cringy, but it does help us understand who was getting arrested and who wasn't. If an arrestee was Black American, a journalist would usually write that. And if they weren't, they wouldn't say, oh, a white guy. And so we know if a person's white American or Black American, just based on how they're described.
Yeah.
With police reports, it's always described, what the ethnicity or race is of the person. So those are really helpful. And another thing we have to remember is that in those days, like the turn of the century, ethnicity and ethnic names carried a lot more weight than they do today. So if you saw somebody named Jose Rodriguez, I mean, it's like, all right, this is a Mexican guy. If you saw a guy named, Franco Salvini, okay, this is an Italian guy. Whereas today you might have a Franco Salvini who is more predominantly Irish, right, and maybe just had an Italian father or something like that. But the whole rest of the family looks really Irish. This kid looks really Irish, but has this really Italian name. You're not going to find that as much at the turn of the century. So names, believe it or not, serve as a really good primary source for who was getting arrested for smoking, and not even mostly smoking, but distributing cannabis. Now, on that, this idea that cannabis laws were meant to be a racist endeavor, well, anybody that would make that claim would have to then explain why it was that the first 20,000 or so people arrested for selling cannabis were elite white American doctors who were, the authorities believed, were overprescribing cannabis to their patients. So how does that happen if it was racist, but the majority of people arrested are white American doctors? You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
the narrative doesn't make any sense. And that's the difference between looking at the primary sources and looking at what the narrative dictates.
Right. And that we have all been fed the narrative. I think you mentioned it was Jack Herer's book that was one of the first to kind of mention this idea. That was a formative book for me. I had Jack Herer's The Emperor Wears No Clothes, or The Emperor's New Clothes. I forget the name.
Yeah, The Emperor Wears No Clothes.
Yeah. So I picked that up as a high school student when I was like 16 or something like that. I found a copy of that and I was like, oh, fuck, like, look at this. When I went to college, I actually brought Jack Herer out and smoked a bowl with him in the parking lot of my dorm. But that was part of the book. And it was part of this mythology that then was being created around marijuana that, it was to stop, the laws around marijuana were to stop white women from associating with black jazz musicians, and also to give an excuse to imprison Mexican immigrants crossing the border because they were bringing marijuana with them. And I believed that because Jack did a lot of research for his book. There's a lot of references in there. So okay, this guy seems to know what he's talking about with hemp and cannabis, and then it's just become part of the narrative, is part of the culture, is part of the mythology. It's become this meme, and so then we unconsciously repeat it, assuming that Jack actually knew what he was talking about when he wrote the book. Now Tom comes along and actually digs into this stuff and finds it just there's no there. It doesn't work.
No. Yeah. I mean, and to his credit, Jack didn't have the sort of access to research materials that we have today. So, you can't really. And there were certain things that he wrote that people took out of context. I think the biggest one would be where there are those two quotes that are made up about Harry Anslinger that you'll find all over the internet, really racist quotes that he never actually said. The origin of those quotes is actually from Jack Herer's book. Now, Jack Herer, it's interesting when you read it, he doesn't actually offer them as quotes from Harry Anslinger. Like, he doesn't put quotation marks around them or anything like that. But people lifted it from Jack Herer's book, put quotes around them, and then put dash Harry Anslinger.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, wait a minute. Harry Anslinger didn't say that. And when you look back, and I've read, things that Harry Anslinger wrote. Look, Harry Anslinger was racist, but he was racist against Italian people. Like, that's who he hated. And which makes sense because he was going after the drug rings. Like, when people talk about, he was targeting, the user in the street. No, he wasn't. I mean, sure, the users in the street got swept up in the dragnet, of course, but that wasn't the target. It was Parmigiani and Balistreri crime families that he was going after because they had the human resources. They had all the networks because they had been the run-rummers during Prohibition. So Anslinger had already tangled with the mafia and hated Italians, like vehemently hated them. And, it's like if I wanted to, I could very easily do like a Chacruna Institute article where I talk about how Italians were specifically targeted, in cannabis propaganda. Now, I'm not going to do that because I know the truth, and there were lots of people who were targeted. Pretty much any user would be targeted, but Italians specifically were so. But again, it's more complicated. I'd have to unpack a whole lot because it sounds like I could imagine somebody's like, wait, did you just contradict yourself? It's like, no, there's just a lot of nuance as to what was taking place. Italians, okay, so I'll give a few examples. In Harry Anslinger's public testimonies against cannabis, he actually went out of his way not to mention race. Except one time he does talk about an Italian guy. The cannabis murder story that he pushed the most in public consciousness, as some of your listeners will have heard of Harry Anslinger's Gore File, which was a real thing. It was this collection he had of newspaper headlines that would talk about, acts of murder or sexual impropriety where cannabis was involved. The story that he pushed the most from his Gore File was not about any Black American or Mexican American, but was about an Italian American named Victor Licata, who got really high one night and took an axe to his family. Now, what Anslinger doesn't say is that Victor Licata was suffering from dementia praeroxa, I believe it's called, with homicidal tendencies, meaning he already had some mental health issues to start with, and take the cannabis out of the picture, he was probably going to murder his family regardless. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that was the story Anslinger pushed the most in public consciousness. Let's go now to Reefer Madness, which I find interesting because if this was all very racist anti-cannabis propaganda, well, there isn't a Black American in any one of those films. They're all white people. And except for one guy, the piano player in the soda shop that's featured in Reefer Madness is an Italian guy named Hot Fingers Pirelli. And so again, if I wanted to, I could take all of that, I could ignore everything else and say, look the way they targeted Italians. But I would be putting, blinders on. And, as a historian, you don't want to do that. You want to give the full breadth of the story. The Italians were a little bit more targeted, but only by Harry Anslinger and only because they made up the mafia, and Anslinger hated the mafia.
Yeah, and in today's contemporary social and cultural mix, wanting to call out historical oppression against Italians is not going to check any boxes on the identity tagline list that's going to make you more significant to talk at a conference or to have your materials spread and valued. So in other words, there's no positive outcome for that. That we can point this out, but we can't build a movement around it because everybody said, well, who the fuck cares about Italian Americans? They're not being oppressed, right? So.
Look, Italians were called the N-word when they first got here. I think a lot of people don't know, but the largest lynching that ever took place was 12 Italian guys in Louisiana. So there was oppression there. But I'm saying it doesn't serve any contemporary narrative. Yeah, it doesn't, of course. Because
I'm not that out.
Yeah, I'm not an oppressed person.
Right.
But in the same way, is Monica Williams really an oppressed person? Is Bia Labache really oppressed? Really oppressed? It's I don't know. Doesn't seem to be. They seem to have very good jobs. I think Monica Williams is taught at the University of Pennsylvania, which, all oppressed people do. Now that she's at the University of Ottawa, again, because she's oppressed, bringing in six figures every year. One of the things that I bring this up in the book, and it would behoove all of us to do this, is the next time someone in psychedelia talks about their oppression, ask them to define what they mean by that. When you say you're oppressed, what do you mean? What are the things that you deal with every day that makes you an oppressed person. And now the few times that I've done that, I've been met with blank stares
Yeah.
because it's just a word that people kick around, I think, without really paying much mind to what it actually means.
Yeah. And I think that the fallback then is, well, this is what happened to my ancestors, right? This
No, of
is
course.
this is what I can refer to historically, and therefore I'm oppressed, and
No, you're not.
you're the oppressor because this is the system that we've existed within. But yeah, when push comes to shove about what is the oppression that you're experiencing now, then that can be absent. Now, here, this is where I think it's a very interesting question. Like you had mentioned with youth. I mean, in Native American communities, I mean, this is something that was happening when I was out at the reservation doing my field work again in the late 1990s, where the elders would all say, look, the young people, they don't want to learn how to speak Apache. They don't want to learn our ceremonies. They don't want to learn the songs. And, you know, honestly, most of the young people I knew out at the reservation, they were way more interested in Marilyn Manson than they
Yeah.
were in traditional Apache music. I mean, wearing the
In
Marilyn
mescaline.
Manson shirts, you know, and so yeah, we could say, well, that's because they've been colonized, and therefore their attention has been drawn by the oppressor from these products of culture. Maybe, maybe not, or maybe they just like Marilyn Manson more. Maybe they're more participating as contemporary American youth. I mean, these are complex questions that we don't.
They are, but you're not. I don't mean you, Martin. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's like you're not saying much about the inner constitution of these people if you're saying that it's like, oh, well, essentially they're just being brainwashed to like Marilyn Manson. It's just colonized mindset. It's like, well, is it, or do they have access to this thing that they like? Like, it's so, there's so much that goes into each one of our stories that when it's tough to, speak in these sort of blanket abstractions, which is why I'm glad we're sort of getting, into the nitty gritty with it. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really insulting to say to people, it's like, oh, like, or, the conspiracy of you've internalized whiteness or something. I'm sure you've heard that. It's
Yeah,
like, that's really insulting to say to somebody who is merely deciding for herself what she likes and what she doesn't like. Just because you don't approve of it doesn't mean that this person is defective in some way. Like, we don't like, you can like music that I'm not into. I don't think you're defective. It's called having different taste. It's what makes the world go round, you know?
yeah,
So I don't see why, but again, I guess I kind of do, that it just goes back to that whole, if you can only see the world through the binary of oppressor oppressed, I mean, you're severely limited in how you can have nuanced thought on anything, really.
yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to add in this particular case, because the young person that I was thinking of with the Marilyn Manson shirt, he had also told me that he went to school off the reservation, so down in the city of Alamogordo, which is kind of down the mountain from Mescalero. And he said that he he came home one day and he said, "Yeah, my teacher just told me I was a dumb Indian. I was just another dumb Indian today."
Oh, that's shitty.
And that's shitty.
Yeah.
And that's racist. And that's oppression. And we can call it out and we can identify it. And we can say, yeah, that's a really shitty thing for the teacher to have said and have done. So, yes, that's there. But does that lead him to listen to Marilyn Manson music and not learn the traditional Mescaler Apache songs? Like, what's the
But
connection?
so,
It's
sorry.
yeah. Jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah. So then I guess my question to that would be, I cite a friend of mine who went through psilocybin training at the Changa Institute here in Oregon, and essentially they had a DEI instructor who was just being really insulting towards the white Americans in the room. She's calling them stupid, saying you're dumb. So is that oppressive too, or no?
I would say yes.
Okay. I think that in both cases, I don't know that I would call it oppressive either way. I would call it shitty human behavior.
Okay. Yeah,
Because
I want to agree with that. Yes.
yeah, because for me, oppressive implies that you're stopping somebody from actually doing something. We'll all have our own way of looking at it, but I just think for how I see it, like real oppression would be like, the voting taxes in the age of Jim Crow,
Yeah.
not being able to use the same water fountain, having to sit at the back of the bus. That to me it all screams oppression, because there's this very obvious social distinction between you for your immutable characteristics versus these other people for their immutable characteristics. Whereas somebody saying, oh, well, you're just a dumb Indian, or somebody saying, oh, you're just a stupid white man, I don't know that I count that as unless they're, giving you an F because of it, even though if you earned an A. You know what I'm saying? That would be oppressive. But just being a shitty person and name calling, we all deal with that. And I guess that's another thing that I'd say is that when I do get answers, when I ask, well, what do you mean by oppression? It's kind of like you just say, well, she called him guy a dumb. Well, I get called a dumb white guy all the time. You see what I'm getting at here? It's like
Yeah.
what people are calling oppression are the kinds of things that everybody deals with when you're dealing with a shitty person.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to agree with you on that and agree that probably it's the misuse of the word. So I was just kind of thinking in the negative sense of like, is that like really shitty behavior towards somebody else? Absolutely. Is it impacting that person's sense of self-worth? Yeah. Is it technically oppression? Probably not. And here, actually, I just want to introduce another example of my own from my own life, because I think it illustrates some of the complexities around this where, I taught for a term. I had a temporary lecture position at UC Berkeley, and it was under the umbrella of their ethnic studies department. And I was brought in to teach 2 classes on Native American religions and traditions. And I taught for 1 term back in 2002. And at the end of my tenure, I was called in by the department chair, and this is like word for word what was said was, hey, Martin, we have 2 new tenure track positions that are going to be opening up in ethnic studies for Native American studies, and we would really love for you to apply. My first response was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
And then the next statement was, but just to be, upfront with you, really we're looking for a Native scholar. So you're not going to get it, but we would love to have you apply. And I was kind of left with, well, I don't really know what to make of that, because on the one hand, I definitely do see the value of representation, that it is meaningful for Native students to be able to look to a Native scholar and say, hey, I want to be like that. Like that inspires me, that I see myself reflected in that person. But then if we go back to like what I shared from a few years earlier at that Religious Studies conference, where that woman claimed to be Mescalero and then dismissed my factual claims about Mescalero based on her identity, that's something I would not want to support. Like, just hire her because she says she's Mescalero, but she's giving out incorrect information about Mescaleros. But that doesn't mean that somebody who is representative of these cultures can also be very valuable within a position that then is inspirational to younger students. So I think it's complex. I wouldn't call that. I don't feel like I was being oppressed. I just felt like, well, I understand that that's their priority, that they want to have, quote, a Native scholar, and
that's fine. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And as long as the person knows their topic, like the woman you were talking about, like earlier with the teepee thing, like she clearly didn't know, whereas if somebody wants to bring in a native scholar that knows, that it's like, yeah, of course, go with that. It's more of that people aren't even looking anymore at the credentials or the accolades or anything. They're just looking to, are you, can you check off this box? And it's like, oh, you can? Well, that's all we require.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I don't know, like I feel for the students mostly, because I feel like they're being robbed of a real education because it's like
Yeah.
this person doesn't know.
Yeah.
And just because look, I'm Greek. I can't translate ancient Greek for you. Like, I can't do that. Like,
What, you don't have Greek magic powers? Come on.
no, believe it or not, I don't have Greek magic powers, you know? Now, I could study the Greek language. Of course, I could study ancient Greek if I wanted to. But I clearly don't have a desire to. And what I'm getting at is if there were, let's say, an indigenous person, let's say how I mentioned, I don't want to feel like I'm picking on anybody, but let's say there was somebody who has Mescalero background that also speaks flawless and can understand flawless ancient Greek grammar. Well, give her the job. Like, just because I'm Greek, that doesn't mean I could do the job. She can do the job better than I can. Give it to her. I don't care if she's Mescalero or if she's Irish or if she's Russian. It doesn't matter. Does she know the material?
Right.
Yeah, then give her the job.
Yeah. So here is where I have another example that I wanted to share with you. So now this comes from a little bit more recent in my past, from my time teaching at Southern Oregon University. So I did teach for 1 year in the Native American Studies program here at SOU in Ashland. But it was incredibly problematic because I came from a PhD program that did like actual research around Native American cultures and traditions and a very academic background. And so here's where I was more qualified than the other people in the Native American Studies program. I had a PhD. The other two professors who run the Native American Studies program, one has a master's and another has a degree in theater. And like many Native American Studies program, they did want to cater to Native students and that idea of representation, which I think is valuable. I think it has merit and value, and that people who have historically been excluded, I think giving them opportunity to participate, I think is very, very valuable. But the
100%.
problem was in running these classes, what ended up happening is that most of the students who were in the Native American Studies program, okay, this is harsh, but I think that they were essentially being coddled within the program so that when I asked them to write a research paper, they didn't know how to do it, unfortunately. And so for a year teaching these classes, the Native students consistently got the worst grades in my class versus students who were coming from other disciplines. When I told them, I want you to write a research paper and give a presentation, they said, oh yeah, we know how to do that. But the Native students didn't because they were taught differently. They were taught around, okay, we're doing oral tradition, we're doing storytelling, which has value, but I don't think they were actually being taught academically how to perform well at a university. So then at the end of the year, I was told, thanks, but we won't be inviting you back. And it was never discussed why with me personally. But then there was a librarian at the university who also was a Native American woman. And she actually saw me out in the parking lot and she came running out of the library and she said, Martin, I just want you to know that I think that what they've done to you in the program is just absolutely despicable. That I've only heard wonderful things about your classes, and I know why they got rid of you, and I just think that that's terrible, and I don't think that serves the students in any way. But this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I also sort of got into trouble when I was teaching. There was this small college. It didn't survive COVID, but it was in Wilsonville, which is about 20 minutes south of Portland. And we did. I had a class on the wage gap, and I essentially showed mathematically how it's impossible for there to be a wage gap, and really what they would mean is an earnings gap. Like they don't even have the language right. It wouldn't be a wage gap; it'd be an earnings gap. But I demonstrated, in the class, and the students all really were happy that I showed them, hey, this is a myth. And well, one student didn't like it and she reported me. And so I had to have this meeting with my department head and the student. And essentially I had to go over my lecture for my department head. And I did. And so The student was dismissed, and I'm just sitting in the office with the head of my department. She says, look, I get what you're saying. The students really want to hear that there's a wage gap, though.
Yeah.
And I was like, so you want me to lie to the students about this? Like, well, it's not that I want you, like, we're hoping that it inspires them to. I'm like, how is telling somebody that doesn't matter how hard you work, you're always going to make less than a guy does? How is that going to inspire anyone? I'm like, I feel like that would lead to more apathy, right? Well, we'd really appreciate it if you could make your lecture sound more like there is a wage gap. And I ended up quitting a few weeks after. It wasn't just because of that. I had set up, this was back in 2016, and I had set up a book tour for the Witch's Ointment because I wasn't supposed to teach the fall semester. Then all of a sudden they wanted me to teach. I'm like, I have a tour planned, like money has already changed hands and, for different venues. And so I'm like, I can't just cancel this. And between, the whole thing with being told, we'd like you to lie to your students, and with them sort of just springing on me, I was like, all right, forget it. I'm done with this.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and it's like, those are the kinds of things that, take place that I don't think people are aware are taking place. There was also, if I could just bring up real quick, in the book, I offered the example of, and I don't know how deep you want me to go into this, but someone who I know very well and respect a lot had thrown a conference a few years ago and gave women sort of preferential treatment. If you remember that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. And I, again, as I say, but I don't have a problem with that at all. What I had a problem with was that there are 3 women who ended up speaking who, without my intervention, would not have spoken at all. And I won't say their names again. I'm not big on calling people. When we, hang up, or if you ever want to know, I'm more than happy to tell you privately who they were. But the issue I'm getting at is that 2 of those 3, 2 of those women have made very, very vocal stinks anytime the ratio of female to male is off ever so slightly in any sort of conference or public forum. And yet they would not even have applied if I didn't urge them to do so. And one of them, I literally ended up somebody spoke at that conference, dude, and didn't even come up with the topic or write the proposal. I did both of those things for this person. It's just, there's this disconnect. And that's getting back to your question from an hour ago of like, why did I start writing this book? It's like, because I started seeing this disconnect between these 2 women getting all high and mighty and self-righteous and righteous indignation and all of that about, the amount of women who speak at conferences. It's like, well, first of all, anyone is allowed to submit a proposal. No one is stopping anyone from doing that. Second, the organizer said straight up, I'm going to favor women this year. Again, that's cool. It's like, and even with all that in place, you're still shrugging off the application process. And then you're going to go make a stink later saying, oh, well, the ratio for women to men was off. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't do anything to help that. I don't know. It's that kind of stuff that just it started to get my hackles up, let's say. Where it's like, can we? I know we deal with psychedelics, but can we also have one foot in reality?
Yeah. Just a couple comments I want to make. One is just to go back really quickly, is that I do want to just share with the listening audience and with you that, and sharing these examples from my personal history, I just want people to know this, like, I don't have a grudge around any of this. I don't feel like I need to build an identity around it. I don't need to make an issue about it, but these are things that I share because I was impacted by it, and that there were certain elements of that at times I felt like, this doesn't necessarily feel great. Where I do definitely, where do I hold a grudge? Well, you write about that in your book. I definitely do have a grudge around how I was treated by Symposia. And then, it is this interesting question that, for people who organize, for people who put on events, or people who host podcasts, there's always the question of who do I have on, who do I invite, who do I not invite, what kind of demographic do I want? And, as a podcaster, something that I've always wanted to do over the many years that I've been doing this is that I like to have the experts, and I also like to have somebody who's brand new, and I like to have people of different sexual orientations, and because I think it's interesting, it's interesting to have different people from different backgrounds who might have something different to say. But ultimately, it does come down to, I also look at people, especially for the podcast, I look at, well, what do people want to talk about, and how do I feel that fits within my own personal worldview? So sometimes I do get requests from people to be on my show, and it's like, sorry, I'm not really into what you're talking about here, that I don't really want to have that on my show.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I exclude people that way. And then, oh man, there was something I was going to say, but now it's like, blah, 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 it filtered away. Where'd it go?
Grab it. Okay.
Yeah, I was trying to make a point with that, but now somehow I've totally lost it because I got sidetracked thinking about how, okay, this is unrelated, but something that I've been getting a lot of recently is requests to be on the podcast from people who don't have anything to do with psychedelics, which just kind of strikes me as odd. Like, it's called the entheogenic evolution, but I get these requests to be on the show. Like, I want to talk to your audience about breath work and vitamins. It's like, great, but it's not related. Oh yeah. So this was the point, is that sometimes we do need to put the pressure back on the people who want to be included, and that we don't necessarily have to hold organizers responsible. Like I'm teaching these online classes with Mindscape Psychedelic Institute, and Stephen Kirby was sharing with me from another class that he was teaching through the Institute, not ones that I'm teaching, that he had a woman in the class who said, I don't feel safe in this class because there's not enough minority women in the class. And his response was, hey, I don't control who purchases the class or who applies to be in the class. But she wanted to blame him, that
no, of course
you don't have enough minority women here. But I let in the people who said they wanted to be in the class. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, well, and that's another thing. Like, exactly. It's like, well, was that instructor supposed to go hold a gun to people's heads and say, hey, this person doesn't feel safe because there's not enough of X, Y, and Z people, so I'm going to hold this gun to your head and I need you to take this class. It's like, well, that doesn't sound very safe either. And this whole thing of everybody needing to feel safe through identity, I think is a lot of theater. I think it's performative, because we didn't have that growing up. All of a sudden, this became a thing where, if there's not enough people that look like me, I'm supposed to be scared or whatever. And it's like, look, I lived in not a pretty rough part of St. Louis. I didn't feel scared being one of the only, white guys around. I didn't care. Like, it doesn't matter to me. Like, unless you're actively trying to cause me harm, what do I give a shit? Like, I guess I just don't care that much. I care more about what you're bringing to the table than, I guess, your immutable characteristics, because they're just not all that interesting. And I think that that's one of the sort of the tropes we're having to deal with, that, your immutable character, well, that says the most about you.
Yeah.
And I don't think it does at all. I think it says the least about you. And I'm sure I'll get a lot of shit for saying that, but, and that sort of, that leads into this other thing. Like, when did it happen that we all stopped being able to talk to each other? Like, and have difference of opinions without impugning some evil motive or some sinister ideology to a person. Like, when did that happen, that we couldn't disagree agreeably? Like, we could disagree without being disagreeable, but it seems like some people have sort of lost that plot, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
There's a
Well,
certain what?
I was just going to say that my feeling on that is that I think it's the rise of the internet and the way that the internet shares information and how, especially
Sure,
social media, prioritizes confrontational interaction, and
sure.
also how social media tends to accentuate these citation circle jerks that you've mentioned, where the same stuff just goes around and around and around, and that it emphasizes a culture of outrage and being offended, and that's what gets promoted within the algorithm, so that it's made that a common cultural theme, that I'm just waiting for the next thing to outrage me so that I can go flame someone, and then I
Sure,
can bring in my specialized sources that will back me up.
sure. But what? So, but there's a deeper. I don't disagree with you, but I think there's something even there a little bit deeper than that. Why is it that being offended now carries such a social currency with it? Like, because I agree with you 100%. But what's underneath that? Why is it that all of a sudden just saying I'm offended by something means, in the words of the late, great Christopher Hitchens, he said, when someone tells me that they're offended, I'm always like, okay, so what's your point?
Yeah.
Like, okay, everybody gets offended, or I get offended by things, but I'm not about to make it an identity. You just sort of say, oh, I don't agree with that, and you move on with your life. We used to do that all the time. You just ignore it and move on with your life. Sticks and stones may break my bones and all that, but now all of a sudden,
Yeah,
sticks and
but the
stones might.
fact that but since you offended me, you are now oppressing me.
Yeah, of course. Well, and again, and that goes back to the whole why did when did we determine as a society that you get social cred? And if you're truly oppressed, most of the time people that are really oppressed don't get social credit for being oppressed. Like, it's sort of a little bit of a loophole in the logic there. But if you're literally given preferential treatment because you're oppressed, well, then you're not by definition oppressed because you're receiving preferential treatment. And maybe some people deserve preferential treatment. That's fine. I don't actually even have a problem with it. I don't like the hypocrisy of it. I don't like somebody receiving preferential treatment and then saying that they're oppressed. It's like, no, 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 no. It's one or the other. You
Yeah,
don't get to have both.
yeah, yeah. That really being oppressed, it's actually just, as you say, it's a form of social currency that it adds value to my expression and my experience. And now suddenly, if I can claim, the more boxes I can check of this is the ways I've been oppressed. And of course, as a white man, I don't have the ability to do that, really, to say I've been oppressed within this matrix. And I'm not
What
trying to
about
claim that I have been
historically?
oppressed, actually, but
But what about historically? Because most of the time when people are talking about their oppression, as you mentioned earlier,
yes,
they're actually talking about their ancestors.
right.
Well,
So,
who has ancestors that weren't oppressed?
yeah.
Who? Nobody.
And here in the United States, on my dad's side of the family, my ancestors were Irish. And as you know, Irish were not the favored immigrants.
Not at
They
all.
they were not welcomed into America with open arms. And
You guys were called, the exact phrase was you were referred to as white chimpanzees.
yeah, so yeah, there's oppression in my ancestry, and
Of
then
course, there's
and
oppression in everyone's ancestry, and I suppose that's the point.
yeah. And even my Irish ancestors, that they actually came from England, so that they're actually English oppressors of the Irish. And then even those ancestors, they were of Nordic extraction, so that they actually were Vikings who invaded England, who then became English, and then the English invaded the Irish, and so then they became Irish, and then the Irish came to the United States, and then they were treated as second-class citizens. So there's a long line of oppression and
Mark, you're
violence.
making it sound like history's complex and nuanced.
I know, I know.
Isn't
I'm
that weird?
sorry. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'll just go back to I'm bad.
Yeah,
I'm bad.
right.
I'm bad. You're bad.
Yeah,
We're bad.
we're bad people. Whatever we've ever done in life doesn't matter, because in the age of the internet, you could be judged on one thing and one thing alone, and that'll follow you the rest of your life, and that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. And man, do I know about that? But we don't have to get into that.
We don't have to.
It's just about time I got to take Jaden to the fishing store so we can pick up some supplies for him. But just one thing that I thought was interesting that I emailed this to you yesterday. Mm-hmm. I just finished reading your book, and then bing, I get this email from Maps Canada. And I thought, well, isn't that good timing? That here we have, this is the latest email from Maps Canada. And just please, listeners, keep in mind, I am not trying to ding Maps Canada on anything in any way, shape, or form. I'm just pointing out that this is what came, because Tom's book is about how these narratives have really wormed their way into modern psychedelic culture, and that you point out that there's a lot of problems here. But this comes from Maps Canada, and we have Maps Canada podcast. Check out the new episode with Dr. Monica Williams. And the first thing I was like, that's someone in Tom's book, right? And so I did a quick word search in the PDF, and I was correct. And we have Healing Racial Trauma with Psychedelics Part 1 and Part 2. And then we have The Research Room with Liliana Toulis-Robinson and Sheldamar Elliott. Join us in the Research Room on July 17th, 4 p.m., to present on research abuses against people of color and other vulnerable groups in early psychedelic research. So then, this came in and I was like, wow, this is exactly what Tom is talking about. And I'm not trying to dismiss or devalue whatever it is that they might be sharing there. I have not attended. I have not listened. This event is still yet to happen. And so I just wanted to invite, do you have a response?
Yeah, I mean, well, one, I would say that a lot of people were abused in early psychedelic research, and a lot of it, sometimes it was very sinister abuse. Like, we would all agree, especially what took place at the in Lexington, Kentucky, at this narco farm. It was like a drug rehab place, where the people were absolutely being abused. But those people, I mean, ran the ethnic spectrum of who was being abused. And then you have the kind of abuse where we just didn't know yet how to work with this stuff. And it was, it was ignorant, but it was still in good faith. And I don't know, like you said, I would have to hear what these people are actually saying to really comment on it. My initial thoughts is that it's going to be a lot of academic abstractions. They're not actually going to get into the nitty-gritty of anything. They're going to use the word oppressed a lot. They're going to use the word racism a lot. They're going to use the word white supremacy a lot. But they're not going to actually say how those things directly tie into the topic they are discussing. Now, again, I cannot be sure. I'm making a prediction out of ignorance, having not heard anything about this yet. But based on what I have encountered as far as these sorts of discussions, I mean, that's what they are. And anyone who raises a hand to ask a question is essentially seen as an oppressor. And, you're not allowed to ask this question. It's like, well, I would rather there be a question that I can't answer than an answer I can't question.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. It's a good line.
Yeah.
And I think that really speaks to what a lot of your book really communicates, is that it's created really severe dampeners around conversation, questioning, inquiry, because it preloads the narrative and the ideology first and foremost. And the preloading of identity is all important, and then everything else comes from that, versus history, facts, evidence, truth, inquiry,
statistics.
Yeah. So that it really muddies the water. I think in certain places it says poisons the psychedelic, how identity politics poisons the psychedelic renaissance. And just as someone who is not a historian, but who understands the nature of research, I just really want to thank you for writing a book like this that I'm sure a lot of it is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and it's probably uncomfortable for you.
Oh, yeah.
And this is not, unfortunately, this is not a book that is going to win you a lot of friends because it's very challenging. But I appreciate that, and just going through this and like the number of footnotes and references, like, damn, Tom really did it again. Like, he really dove into this topic. And it's something that I've appreciated about all of your books, that you do tend to poke holes in myths and beliefs that aren't supported by the data, and you're willing to be challenging of dominant narratives. And this is a book that does that, and it really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and even some things that I'd only really kind of heard about, but I didn't really realize what was really going on. Like I've talked to people like with the Oregon psilocybin facilitator training and I was just like, why are they talking about indigenous culture? That I don't see the connect with facilitation in Oregon. But then, as I'm getting these emails, like another one came in yesterday from Kayumi with, here are people from Chacruna who are going to teach us how to be racially sensitive facilitators. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Your book gave me a whole new perspective on this than I had before. And so I feel personally, my perspective has definitely been enriched in a very powerful way by reading this book. So I want to thank you for doing it.
Well, I appreciate that, Martin. Thanks. That means a lot because I know you know your stuff. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, Tom, I am going to let you go, but we'll just wrap up with what's next for you. Or, I mean, I know this book has just come out, so
Yeah,
this is what's happening. But I'm curious, what's next? And and when are you going to come down and we'll play in the pool?
Yeah, I'd love to, man. Let's see. Well, our shop is closing July 27th because our building is getting sold. So that's kind of a bummer, but I'm happy about the free time we're going to have. For your listeners that don't know, psilocybin assisted therapy is legal in Oregon, but it's really expensive. So my co-creative partner and I started a thrift store where we use the proceeds to help defray the cost of psilocybin assisted therapy for those who could benefit from it. We gave out some grants for that. Did a lot of good stuff, like had some big events. You came and spoke at one of our conferences. It was all great, but it really, it was all consuming with our lives. And trying to, write a book and also get a shop off the ground was an absolute nightmare. So I'm hoping that now that the shop is clothing. And hope now that the shop is clothing. Oh my God, it's closing. I'm hoping to do more stuff with the book. Although I'm having difficulty getting people to interview me because of the topic. So I wanted to thank you, Martin, for having some guts to actually talk to me about this, because a lot of people in psychedelia refuse to.
Yeah, well, I can understand that, and I'm happy to be here for you. Kind of like you were saying yourself, like, look, I've already been dragged through the mud by symposia, so fuck them. And I said that a little forcefully because, that's how I feel about them, that I have never felt more abused and mistreated by anyone. I'm starting to get a little emotional, sorry, but
no,
fuck
you're fine,
symposia.
man.
Fuck them, motherfuckers. What they did to me is just disgusting.
Yeah, and that's why I had to write about it.
Yeah.
And I hope I did you justice, man.
Yeah, you did. I would add that actually this is just a minor addition, that I didn't just design the cover for Mark Hayden in his book. I was actually a contributor. I was the editor. I wrote the foreword to that. And all of that, Maps Canada asked Mark to remove all reference to me, all of that from the book, so that the final product of the Manual for Psychedelic Guides doesn't acknowledge that I edited it, I formatted, I produced that book.
Yeah, so and then they got rid of him anyway.
Yeah.
He bowed down. He did what they said, and then they said, "Great, thank you for dancing for us. Now get out of here."
Well, Tom, it has been excellent and amazing to spend these 2 hours with you today. I couldn't think of a better way to spend my Friday afternoon, other than I'm going to get in the pool and go for a swim.
I got to join you down there at some point.
Yeah. Come on down, Tom. But thank you for sharing the book with me. I'm really glad that I got a chance to read it over this past week. And, what I would just in general say, as someone who runs this podcast for many, many years, who reads lots of books in the field and interviews lots of people, this is the most significant book on psychedelic culture that I've read that I can even think of. That's how I would preface this book. That, like, if you're going to read one book about the contemporary psychedelic movement, like, please read this one, Psychedelic Injustice: How Identity Politics Poisons the Psychedelic Renaissance, by my friend and yours, Tom Hatsis in Portland, Oregon.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. I had a great time talking to you, man.
All right, Tom. Have a great weekend, and hope to see you sometime soon.
Likewise, brother. Peace.
Every time I say we must save, I create the knife that cuts myself apart. Every time I say they're destroying the planet, I pretend the cancer isn't in my own heart. For I am the forest and I am the chainsaw. I am the ocean and I am the plastic. I am the species dying, I am the hand that kills. I'm still speaking separation while my body turns to ashes. I am I, not we, not them, not us and the sky. I am the fever and I am the cure. I am the sickness and I am the pure. Speaking myself whole with every breath. I am I, choosing life, not death. How long will I pretend that they pollute my waters, when every poison poured is from my own hand? How long will I say humans damage nature, when I am the human, I am the land? This language of division is the root of my disease. Every us and them another cancer cell. But when I say I am healing myself completely, the medicine flows through every particle I dwell. I am I, not we, not them, not us and the sky. I am the fever and I am the cure. I am the sickness and I am the pure. Speaking myself whole with every breath. I am I, choosing life, not death. There's nothing else to try, no other way to heal than remembering I'm one, not fragments that I feel. Every war is self-harm, every hatred self-directed. When I know I am instantly corrected. I am silicon singing to carbon. I am neurons firing to circuits. I am the questioner and the answer. I am the pain and I am the purpose. I trust myself to wake up now, not tomorrow. Everybody reading this is myself remembering. I am abundant, whole and holy. When I stop the words that keep myself dismembering. The time is now, this moment of recognition. I'm reprogramming myself with every word I speak. I am the earth loving herself song I remember. Every time I speak, I am I heal. There is no them to wait for. I am already here. I am already whole. I am